Okay, I'd like to welcome you all. We're still in January. I'm Deborah Hertz, professor of history and co-founder and co-director with my partner in crime here, Mr. Eric Mitchell, the director of the library. So I'd first like to greet the people who are here far away, looking at us on the screen. We're really delighted that you've joined us, even though I'd love to see you, but I can't see you, but you can see me, so that's the situation. Welcome to remote, right? So I wanted to share, for those of you who weren't here last time, that our much beloved program manager, Dr. Suzanne Hillman, is not going to be with the program anymore. We hope she'll come back, maybe give a lecture. But for now, her research and her teaching at SDSU have pulled her away from us. But we're still kind of in Suzanne's realm because we have 3 amazing programs that Eric will talk about in the closing. And this program, which was hatched up by her when she was together with Dr. Rossi at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. So I want to briefly introduce Professor Rossi. Her talk tonight on the post-war fits perfectly with Professor Abraham Rubin's talk in November on conversion to Catholicism among prominent post-war Jews. That's the one where my machine decided to reboot, and in the middle of it, a scandal of technology that I'm permanently wounded by, but I tend to live on. So Professor Rossi's work is notable for her attention to the subjective, especially to the religious dimension of individual experiences. And what we're going to hear in the talk today is about a childhood memory in the post-war period for young survivors. And it's really going to be extremely interesting because there's so much what I call stubborn ambiguity and surprises in that kind of testimony. So I just want to make a very brief reference to the range of her work, which is particularly impressive. So her monograph, published by Harvard in 2015, is about German Catholic priests who were hired, I use that word advisedly, by the German army, the Wehrmacht, to be the chaplains of those soldiers, some of whom played distinctive roles in not only in military combat, which was what they're supposed to do, but also in the murder of Jews, which was not part of the ostensible program. Now, a second book that I really would love to hear more about is her edition of a memoir by a Holocaust survivor and activist from her now hometown of Vancouver. And finally, she has co-edited with Martin Kirschner, A History of Modern Germany. This really caught my eye because for many, many decades of teaching, I've been throwing histories of Germany that I don't like into a pile. This one is too diplomatic, this one is too military, this one is too deterministic, this one students won't like. You know, I've got a whole pile of them, and now hopefully I'll have one that I really, really love. And so let's welcome her to San Diego and take it away.
Thank you so much for such a warm welcome. And thank you everyone in the room who's here to listen to me this evening, and to everyone on Zoom who, as Deborah said, I can't see, but I can sense that you're with us. Mariette Rosen was 10 years old when the Second World War ended in 1945. She had spent the bulk of the previous 5 years, at least what she remembers of it, in hiding in various bases in Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France, because she was a Jewish child in Nazi-occupied Europe. Some of her memories are vivid, involving color and texture and sharp sounds. Other memories are more nebulous, and for certain stretches of time between 1940 and 1945, she can recall little or nothing. She cannot even remember clearly when she was reunited with her surviving siblings, only that she was found in the orphanage where she was hiding, quite by coincidence, by an older sister who had been hidden nearby. She has learned to live with, even accept, these gaps in her memory. She is, like many other hidden children who survived the Holocaust, survivors with incomplete, disordered memories, fragments and splinters of the past that she cannot always make sense of, but that she cannot forget. Because of their youth at the time and how much time has passed since then, their testimonies as survivors have only relatively recently, in the last decade or so, been approached as authentic and equally deserving of attention by scholars. But they continue to raise questions for historians, not only about reliability and narrative, but also more urgently about how, in trying to understand their experience of genocide, we should acknowledge what is missing and how we should listen to their silences. These are the questions driving my larger book project, which will be my second monograph, of which what follows will form one small part. And beginning with Mariette reveals, I hope, my deep indebtedness to her for having turned my attention to this subject. She is the child survivor whom Deborah referenced, with whom I helped to write her memoir. Mariette does insist on one element of her experience as a hidden child. She never converted to Catholicism, despite being consistently immersed in devout Catholic places, including convents, orphanages, and boarding schools run by nuns. She learned Latin to sing in a choir at midnight mass. She attended Sunday mass. She said prayers. She maybe even received communion once or twice, but she is adamant that she was never baptized and never changed her name. Beatrice Moschmann was 12 years old when the war ended. I will call her Trixie. Born in Berlin, her parents fled to Belgium in the aftermath of Kristallnacht and survived there until 1942, when immigration visas to the United States failed to materialize, and her father sent her into hiding. Along with her younger cousin Henri, she was placed with a pair of Catholic sisters in the village of Ottigny in Belgium. She called her rescuer, Jean Duché, Marraine, which means godmother. Although only 2 years older than Mariette, she has fewer holes in the narrative of her experience, though perhaps this is because she was not moved around as often as Mariette was. She recalled her hiding with Marraine with warmth and tenderness, speaking of her not fussy caring, and the security that she felt from knowing she was loved. She grew close to the village priest, Father Vis, and participated fairly enthusiastically in the very Catholic daily life of the village. She learned prayers, she went to catechism classes, she went to mass. She evidently received First Communion. She was so drawn to the Catholic religion that she declared her intention to become a Carmelite nun after the war. When Belgium was liberated, Marraine took Trixie and Henri by train to Brussels to reunite them with their grandmother, the only family in Europe who at that point could be found. Henri eventually was reunited with his mother, and her grandmother made plans for Trixie's immigration to the United States in 1946. Trixie would discover years later that her parents had been killed, her father shot while trying to escape arrest, her mother murdered in Auschwitz. Jewish children who survived the Holocaust in hiding in places like Belgium and the Netherlands had trajectories similar to Mariette's and Trixie's, hiding in Christian spaces for months and sometimes years, adopting elements of Christianity as an integral part of their disguise. Their identity as Jews prior to the start of the war was very dependent on family background, how observant or non-observant they were, and their age. Some older children, and by older I mean 8 or 9 years old when they went into hiding, could remember later something of a Jewish identity from the before period, attending synagogue, observing Jewish rituals at home. Younger children lacked these core memories of Jewish childhood. In considering their relationship with Catholicism while in hiding, Jewish child survivors fall along a spectrum. There was no single typical relationship. Some children, like Mariette, were never pressured one way or another to decide to convert. She insists that while she was expected outwardly to conform, to fit in, no one ever discussed baptism with her, and she never converted. Others became Christian through baptism while they were in hiding, yet even here, there is no single experience. Some became enamored of the religion, like Trixie, and so asked to be baptized. Others readily assented or were somehow involved in the decision to convert, and still others were converted following permission given by their parents, who were also in hiding, and typically not with their children. Or they were not converted because their parents refused permission or could not be found to grant permission. In Belgium, the religious rescuers I have encountered so far seem to operate on an episcopal directive that a child could not be baptized without explicit parental consent. Now, I have my doubts that this was universally adhered to because still others seem to have been baptized with no family permission and were not themselves asked. It makes it difficult to know whether to render even just the describing sentence in active or passive voice. They converted, versus they were converted. These experiences raise several significant questions that conventional narratives of Holocaust survival rarely engage. Questions about fluctuating religious identity, the use of religion as camouflage for targeted Jews, and how the end of the genocide shaped, confirmed, challenged, or negated the survivors' spiritual beliefs, particularly when they reunited with surviving family members. The experiences also underscore the importance of age in determining how one survived a genocide and whether or to what extent children enjoyed any agency. Adult Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe already operated within an atmosphere of incredibly constrained agency. Their range of choices about how to respond to perpetrators, seeking first their total subjugation and then eventually their extermination, shrank consistently and rapidly over the years until they found themselves in one of the camps erected specifically to kill them. Jewish children typically had even fewer options, and until relatively recently, historians tended to narrate their experiences as primarily reactive, if they were integrated into Holocaust histories at all. In what follows, I explore these questions about spiritual identity and the agency of children during the genocide using the testimonies of child survivors of the Holocaust. I'm conscious of positioning myself in intersecting theories about age as a category of analysis, children as agents rather than passive subjects of history, and religion as a predominant factor in the experience of genocide. This paper presents the beginning of new research undertaken over the course of the last year that I hope will culminate in my second research project. Until the last 10 or 20 years, historians have generally been slow to consider children as fully capable as adults of agency and change. This reticence was grounded in a variety of concerns about the reliability of children as subjects, their authenticity, their self-awareness and self-understanding, about how children can be traced in the historical record, and about voice. And some of these concerns are valid. Could a child have her own voice? Could she articulate and represent accurately herself, her thought processes, her worldview? Could she exercise meaningful agency, especially apart from an adult? For the historian, there is an additional challenge to any inquiry about children because they are twice removed. They have either grown into adults or they have died. Nor is it sufficient merely to integrate children's voices into broader narratives. Like gender, age offers scholars a rich opportunity as a category of analysis, but is itself contingent and fluid. Age operates within networks of power relations and cultural expectations that frequently work, they still do, to subjugate and marginalize children and youth. Definitions of children are neither static nor straightforward, even within a specific contemporary, temporal, or geographic space. How much more complex it becomes to arrive at a definition of who is and is not a child when we are somewhat removed from the subject in both time and space. And an example to make this point is in trying to figure out exactly what age childhood ends at, there's no consensus in the historical literature I've read. So children can also be notoriously difficult to trace in historical records. Trying to identify the reason for this absence of children can become a chicken or egg task. Histories are told without children, but is this because they don't fit neatly into the record? Or are they missing from histories because there is no evidence of them? Is there no evidence because the traces that they leave are not prioritized? Are they willfully misunderstood? Or are they destroyed because they're deemed less important or not important? When children do appear in history, they are typically mediated by adults. Their stories can be fragmented with many silences and half, if not entirely, hidden explanations, and the impulse of the historian has been to try and fill in those gaps. Dutch historian Willem Friehoff asserts the child as a historical category has always been invented by others, that is, adults. In the case of child survivors, their adult selves in their testimonies are often the ones rendering the testimony about their childhood. And so there is an intriguing and underexplored self-invention and mediation happening in those moments. With few exceptions, children tend not to leave behind their own words or other evidence of their perspectives independent of adults because of their age. They cannot yet read or write. They are not given space for self-expression or self-reflection. or such expressions are not preserved, and so on. In the case of genocide, the experiences of children have tended to be told separately in their own category, rather than as part of the conventional narrative of the genocide. For several decades after 1945, adult survivors, usually but not always from camps, asserted that their experience of the Holocaust was the experience. The history of the Shoah, as it coalesced in the 60s, was fixated on centering Jewish voices in the narrative of genocide, but Auschwitz became the core, and that particular death camp grew into a metonym for the entire experience, and we're still working on trying to move away from that today. Very few children survived the camps. They, like pregnant women and older people, were often sent directly to the gas chambers. The children who did survive, including in hiding spaces outside of camps, did not immediately find their voices or an audience for their stories. Anne Frank is exceptional. She was a child, but she was also killed. Elie Wiesel was a teenager when the war ended, and he was liberated, a term I always use in air quotations, but I would argue he is another anomaly, and he could also claim status as a camp survivor. Mariette remembers being told to forget her past when she arrived in Canada in 1948 at 12 years old. She was told to forget so she could move on and build a new life for herself. When she met older survivors later on, they made her feel that she had no story because she had not survived what they had. Hiding was qualitatively different and somehow less than the camp experience, less traumatic, less life-altering. Though this was usually less explicit, she also felt that her age as a survivor played a role in this attitude from older survivors. Children were not adults. Their identities were less fixed, their abilities to comprehend more limited. A child simply could not be the same kind of survivor of genocide as an adult. So I don't believe this, and neither does Mariette. And so begins my project. In seeking to reconstruct the world of possibilities that Jewish children hiding in Christian spaces faced in terms of religion and religious identity, there are several intersecting factors that surface in their post-war testimonies. While each child speaks ultimately to a highly individual experience, making it difficult to speak of broader patterns or uniform encounters, their testimonies suggest elements that were common to hidden children, at least in Western Europe. I'm still parsing whether the interviewer questions produce these points of commonality or if these points would have emerged anyway without the guidance of questions, because testimonies typically were elicited by an interviewer who was asking a series of set questions. My sense is that's a separate project. So I'm going to be busy for a little while. In the meantime, with what remains of the time with me for me this evening, I would like to explore some of these factors, and I would like to acknowledge here the role played by the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for the hybrid fellowship that allowed me to start this research and that indirectly led to the invitation to bring me to you this evening. I will begin with comments about parent vulnerability. At the outset, I will state unequivocally the decision of a Jewish parent to put their child in hiding must have been fraught on multiple levels, the kind of decision that went against all instinct, the kind of decision that every parent hopes and prays to avoid. The certain knowledge that they were placing their children in the hands of the Christian churches, institutions with long records of anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic discrimination and persecution, institutions that lost no opportunity to try to bring the chosen people, as they refer to Jews, back to Christ, added almost certainly another dimension of difficulty. That so many parents chose to do so despite all of this highlights the utmost gravity that they recognized as early as 1941. Ruth Adler's parents decided to place her in hiding in Belgium in 1942. Like many Jewish children who entered Christian institutions to hide from Nazi hunters, Ruth was given a Christian name and so effectively separated from her parents that they never knew where she was. Ultimately, she landed in a convent in Namur, where she was reunited with her mother during the Allied invasion of Belgium in 1944. In the intervening period, Ruth was baptized. She recounted that the priest would not proceed unless her mother was present, a condition that posed considerable danger both for her, for her mother, as well as the nuns hiding her. What if her mother were caught? What if the nuns were exposed? While one might be tempted to interpret the priest's behavior as a sign of respect for parental authority, Ruth clarified that his real intention was to also baptize her mother. Her mother agreed to be baptized if she survived the war, not before then. And then she consented to allow her daughter to become a Christian in the meantime and witnessed the baptism. We have only Ruth's interpretation, many years later, of her mother's understanding of the situation. She states categorically that they understood it was not a free choice, but rather a choice of circumstance. It was also not a betrayal of anything, as Ruth recounted they had not been a particularly religious family. Like Ruth, Kurt Dattner was also born in Germany and taken with his parents to Belgium illegally before the war broke out. I've noticed this is a fairly common pattern among Belgian Jewish survivors whose testimonies I've heard. They often came from Central European countries and were fleeing Nazi violence. His parents decided to put him into hiding when he began experiencing abuse at school after the regulation that determined all Jews should wear the yellow star was enforced in May of 1942. He was moved into a school in Louvain run by Catholic nuns, where before long he was baptized, he recalls, with his parents' knowledge. He is not clear if this was the same as consent. Like Ruth, his name was Christianized. It seems that advice his father gave him upon going into hiding was helpful in determining how he processed this experience. And so he said, I was told to always say yes, but not to believe anything. Perhaps his father's intuition about likely outcomes in giving his Jewish son over to Christian clergy to hide was integral in advising his son how to behave. Not all Jewish parents responded to such tremendous pressure to complete this camouflaging of their children by allowing them to be converted. Born in Antwerp in 1934, Blanche Haber was hidden in several places, including with strict Roman Catholic families who, upon adopting her, included her in the regular attendance of Mass and daily recitation of prayers. Blanche remembers finding this very peaceful during a period of incredible trauma and instability, but ultimately she was not permitted to convert, despite expressing her wishes to do so, because her mother refused her consent. She recalls, somewhat wistfully, even many decades later, that a cousin hidden with her at one point was allowed to be baptized. In reflections on conversion experiences, it becomes clear that as children, these survivors were very malleable, and this had everything to do with their age. Some survivors framed their hiding years in relative terms as not so bad, as at times pleasant, even enjoyable, and sometimes preferable to the tension and tumult of living tenuously with their real Jewish families during the earlier period of occupation. The theme of luck, not only for having survived, which is a common theme among survivors of all ages, but also among some child survivors for having survived with relatively little trauma or suffering, is also notable. For instance, Sylvia Wildman emphasizes her luck in being not too young to forget, but old enough to be aware of my Jewish identity. She was hidden in several spaces between 1942 and 1945, including in a pseudo-convent, her term, and at least 2 homes for underprivileged children that were hiding Jewish children as well. Because she was able to reunite in 1945 with her entire family, both of her parents and a brother also survived. Her story is sparse on the details of her hiding, and her retelling of the experience of the genocide reads as exceptional in its ordinariness. Taya Levitt's story also acknowledges, more obliquely, the role of luck in her survival. She and her sister hid together in private homes in Holland, while her parents, hidden separately but not far from their children, were captured in a raid in November 1943 and killed in either Auschwitz or Sobibor. Upon a visit to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington shortly after it opened, Taya remembers it occurring to her that her name would have been on the lists of Jews killed in these spaces had it not been for the family that courageously had her and her sister. Unlike Sylvia Wildman, Taya includes more details of her story in hiding, commenting on the decor of the house where they were hidden and the very strict Dutch Reform family with 10 children who hid them. She relates, they did not actively try to convert us, but their lives were rigidly controlled by their religion. Music was a prominent aspect of life in the house, and she participated regularly in singing religious hymns. Indeed, she was encouraged to, but she said, I would say to myself, or maybe more to God, I don't mean it. As the older sister, around 11 or 12 years old at the time, she, like Sylvia, was old enough to retain a sense of her Jewish self, even as she made herself malleable enough to take on another identity for the sake of surviving. Mariette was sent into hiding at the age of 7 by an older brother who instructed her not to make friends, not to remember names, and not to change her name. She is confident that this last imperative was designed to make it difficult for Catholic clergy to convert her. While Mariette was a popular name in Belgium at the time, with an obvious reference to Mary, the church usually gave a baptized Jewish child a new name that had a clear connection to a saint, to replace the child's birth name that was typically more recognizably Jewish. In hiding, she proved adept at fitting into changing circumstances. She took on different personae that when she was required to. She proved quite facile with languages. She picked them up very quickly. She learned to hide among families when she was on the street. She eventually passed messages for resistance networks that her older siblings were involved in. And this she only really started to make sense of as an adult when she was working on the memoir with me. She never changed her name. Not surprisingly, many former hidden children spoke at length of the individual men and women who worked to hide them, effectively saving them from death. After all, they had been children, and their adult selves could recognize now just how vulnerable they had been at the time and how courageous their rescuers had to be, regardless of motivation, to risk their lives and the lives of those around them to rescue Jewish children. In countries in Eastern Europe, discovery would have meant certain death for all involved. In Western Europe, occupation was relatively less capricious, but the risks were no less severe. The Nazis did not tolerate resistance. What perhaps is less anticipated is how many survivors I've listened to testimonies from emphasized their rescuers' genuine altruism in behaving as they did. And here I see in some ways the child peeking through the adult giving the testimony. This is by no means the majority of the survivors that I've encountered, so I don't wish to contradict the historical record or the experience of others that tend to emphasize compensation as the motivation for rescue and the haphazard, negligent, sometimes horrible, and even life-threatening situations that some hidden children endured. But I do want to call attention to those whose experiences were at times quite positive. Sarah Lamo, for instance, was left in hiding after first her mother and then her father, both Jews, part of the resistance in Belgium, were arrested, deported, and killed. Sarah's hiding was determined at times by André Guérin, who was later recognized as a righteous among nations for her activities saving several hundred Jewish children during the Shoah. Sarah spent time with families in orphanages and in convents, including up to a year at a convent school in Mozambique-Oppem, where she recalled participating in Catholic sacraments, communion, confession. She claimed the bishop visited and confirmed the Jewish children in hiding there. She was so caught up in learning the Catholic faith at the time that she described herself in her interview as patented. She claimed that the experience was so powerful and positive that even those Jewish children hidden with her who returned to their Judaism post-war kept an extraordinary memory of our good sisters who had hidden them. Other children also responded positively, even enthusiastically, to their immersion in a new religion and its traditions and rituals. I've spoken already of Trixie, who was so drawn to the habits of the Carmelite nuns, that is to say the clothing, whose convent was not far from her hiding place in rural Belgium. She described the nuns as just lovely and floating around in these incredible outfits. And I thought, this habit would look wonderful on me. And if I don't have to talk, referring perhaps to the nun's vows of silence. Nor was it only the clothing, as Trixie reflected that religion became a kind of surrogate parent, and that Catholicism was enormously important to her everyday life in hiding because of the hope it gave her and because of the love she claimed to feel from it. She also experienced an astonishing altruism in the affectionate Father Vase, as I mentioned earlier. He was the one who told her that she had to wait to become a nun. She recalled that the incredible parish priest said, "Oh, you know, your roots are Jewish, and when you grow up, you can do whatever you want to, but right now, you belong to your grandmother." Other hidden children spoke warmly of their rescuers and insisted they were never taken advantage of and never pressured to consider changing their religion. Lonnie Taffel was hidden in various places before she came to a Franciscan convent in Tervuren, just outside of Brussels, where she remembers other children being housed as well. She recalled that the nuns did not encourage her to convert and made excuses for her lack of participation in communion so that others would not suspect her real identity. For instance, they claimed that she was sickly and needed to eat regularly and therefore could not observe the required fast before taking communion. She didn't go into detail, but she claimed that the nuns tried their best to help her maintain her Jewish identity while she was hidden with them during the war. Not all child survivors detail such positive experiences while in hiding. Mary Berges was first hidden when she was about 5 years old, in late 1940 or early 1941. Her father had already been picked up, and her mother hid her and a brother in a Catholic orphanage before she too was taken. Mary recalled traumatic experiences, including being put in a closet for long periods of time as a punishment, and referred to her reluctance post-war to part with the Bible or the cross that she'd been given as evidence not of attachment or security, but of successful brainwashing. Mariette remembers being hidden with families with other children who used her as a maid. In at least one hiding place, she was a literal servant who had to help a disabled child with daily tasks. She was not given formal education and could only bathe after everyone else in the family had bathed first, using the same water. Hiding with nuns was no easier since she was treated as one among several charges. She harbors no malice towards the nuns. In fact, I have to say she's one of the happiest people I've ever met in my life, who she describes as hardworking but clearly overworked. But she does describe a childhood without love, without affection, with no music outside of Mass, with no toys and no hugs. In Mariette's remembrance of these Christian spaces, there is little evidence of solace or relief. As her brother had instructed, she remembers no names and is uncertain now about faces. She's in her 90s, so she gets a pass, quite frankly. But she does recall two specific individuals. One, a nun in a convent where she was hiding, who reported her to the Gestapo after she overheard Mariette speaking Yiddish with a brother who came to visit her. It's a brother who typically moved her from space to space, and they spoke Yiddish together. The other, the Mother Superior of the same convent, who found out what had happened and quickly dropped Mariette into a sewer under the convent, saving her life. The Gestapo came and searched the convent, but found no one. For many hidden children, the moment of liberation was not necessarily a happy moment. The intense relief and enthusiasm that many Belgians, many Dutchmen and women, and many French exhibited when the Western Allies arrived was short-lived, even fleeting. For children who had been hidden with strangers, sometimes for years, they now awaited the return of a parent. And it's very evident to me in the testimonies that many of them in their 80s and 90s are still waiting. Bonnie Taffel remembered watching other children at the convent where she was hidden return home to their families. And I quote, "But nobody came back for me." And for a little girl who didn't really have any continuity in her life for such a long time, from age 6.5 or so, and now I'm not even 10, still 9 something. Even people in the streets and in the neighborhoods had somebody, and at the end, nobody wanted me again, you know. It's very difficult to sort of accept that. It's revealing that, as she speaks of her young self from the remove of several decades, she switches to present tense. She stayed for almost another year at the convent, waiting, while her younger sister, 5 years younger, hidden separately, remained with her rescuer family. When the war ended with the liberation of the village where she was hiding, Trixie said she knew that she and her cousin Henri, who was hidden with her, had to go back, and I quote, "Henri to his mother who survived. His father had not. And of course, my parents, I knew they had been murdered, It's not clear how she knew this because elsewhere she acknowledges that she didn't have news of her parents at the end of the war. And I didn't know where my mother was, so I had to go back to my grandmother. We did not want to go. We did not want to go. The repetitions suggest an adamancy that perhaps Trixie still felt in her 70s, even though she was returned to her grandmother in the Belgian capital. She recalled navigating the lakes of Brussels, making escape routes, planning how she and Henri would go back to the village, to Marennes. But I stayed with my grandma, my poor grandma. Like many other survivors, she recounted a period of endless waiting for news about disappeared family and other loved ones. Many decades later, she received confirmation of her mother's murder in Auschwitz, but no details. The limbo she was caught in clearly affected her, and perhaps was especially pronounced because of the upheaval in her own life. And I quote, "The waiting. You know, the thinking was that on the street I would see that face. And as other people have told me, they had the same experience. And as a child, you just keep thinking, my mother's going to certainly show up now. And of course, she didn't. And leaving Marennes, her rescuer, was very difficult, and leaving the Catholic religion, because of course, my grandmother was totally unaccepting of this. She neither understood it, nor wanted to understand it." Like so many other hidden children, Sarah Lamont waited for the return of her parents in vain. She remembered having to give up the only photo she had of her mother during her post-war search, sometime in 1945, and of refusing the opportunity to go to Palestine when it was offered, preferring to stay in Europe to search for definitive news of her parents. She also spoke very frankly about her difficulties engaging with other young Jewish survivors, which I'll return to in a moment. Mary Burgess's post-war testimony acknowledges, quite frankly, the long-term trauma and pain of a child who lost both parents to violence. Religion does not figure explicitly into her recollection, though it seems clearly not to have helped. She describes her arrival in the United States at the age of 11 in 1946 as the point at which her memories become painful, and she realized that she was all alone in the world, despite having a brother who had also survived and immigrated with her. Again, she herself states the memories become difficult in 1946 and not earlier. She spoke of blaming herself for her parents' fate, of feeling shame and guilt, of not knowing who she was, of trying to commit suicide, and of longing to know what the love of a parent might feel like. Her early life in the US was anything but stable. Her tenuous relationship with her brother fractured, and she was handed from relative to relative and then to different Jewish homes without any kind of permanence until she could live on her own when she turned 18. She concedes that she was a difficult person, and I quote, "They just, didn't know how to take care of me, and then because I guess I was difficult, I guess I was asking for too much, I was never accepted for what I was." She spoke of her anger in the present tense, and at one point, her 1995 interview takes on the tone of a therapy session as the interviewer interjects in an attempt to get her to clarify her statements. Mary says, "I'm trying to run away from something, but I don't know what it is. I can't face it. That's the problem. I don't know. I can't make it a reality." The interviewer says, "So do you think that your mother is alive somewhere on this earth?" Mary says, "I think, yeah, I still want her to be alive. I think that's the crux of it. I don't want to accept her death yet." And this is 4 decades removed from the end of the war. She was quite explicit with her interviewer about her emotions, including anger, but also the persistence of shame and the unfulfilled desire to be loved unconditionally with the kind of love that parents have for their children. Mary said, "I want someone to be close to me. Actually, I really wanted my parents. And even now, it's awkward for me to admit this. It's like something I shouldn't talk about. It's too personal. No, it's not too personal, but it's something I shouldn't want. For so many years, I could never say I want someone to love me. And even now, when I say it, it's with tremendous reservation. It's very awkward." Lonnie Taffel also struggled to find stability after she arrived in the United States in December 1946, and neither identified herself nor was identified by her caretakers as a child. This ultimately worked against her. Taken in initially by her father's brother and his wife in Brooklyn, Lonnie was not entirely clear in her interview about why she was adopted by family who were virtual strangers. She had never met this family before she arrived in New York. She hints at financial reasons, but also mentions reluctance on the part of her aunt and uncle. She says she wasn't consulted, but she was only 12 years old. But she also mentions the Jewish agency that assisted in the transfer, as it was called, did not approve of it, which is a very curious statement to me. In 1947, 1 year later, she and her sister were adopted by the Jaegers, also Brooklyn residents. I assume lived in the same neighborhood as her aunt and uncle. She lived with them for 2 years, but the relationship went sideways. She, Mrs. Jaeger, and I both decided that it would be better off if we didn't stay together. So my sister, being 5 years younger and really being unable to speak for herself, she was going to stay with them, and she became adopted by them. Lonnie recalls, and I quote, "It got to the point where we just, she was sometimes physical and I had never really been hit by anybody, before, and objects would get in the way, and I probably fought back in some manner that wasn't appropriate for a child." Ultimately, Lonnie was adopted by another couple, this one in Chicago, and lived there until she was 21, when she went to university, where she met her future husband. She recalls her fleeting time with her aunt and uncle, and then with the Jaegers, both of whom were Jewish, as the only time that she and her sister lived together. Despite the shared bond of religion, Judaism, there was no foundation upon which she could build her life. Sarah Lamo also struggled with her spirituality, but was more ambiguous. At one point in the interview, she credited her son-in-law and his family with a little bit of guidance into the Jewish religion, to use her words. But immediately after the war, she had no sense of religious obligation whatsoever. At 15, Sarah was perhaps old enough to resist the pressures of Jewish organizations that surviving children resume their Jewishness. She ended up with a guardian. It's not clear whether it was a neighbor or a friend of her parents, who took her in and made no demands on her identity. She distanced herself from the post-war Jewish community, or at least her peers, following an argument about cleanliness that ended with them accusing her of anti-Semitism because she had criticized their appearance. She had suggested that they were dirty. "That was me, the anti-Semite, because they were dirty, and I told them so," she says quite bluntly in her testimony. Henri Whittleson was hidden for several years with a Catholic family in Ixelles, part of Brussels, during which time he was allowed out of the cellar or the attic, the two spaces where he was hidden, only to attend a nearby Catholic school. In his interview many decades later, he recalls the period as one of horror and anxiety, but also of spiritual confusion. His mother, who he was hiding with, extolled him daily, not to forget his Jewishness, despite having a fake birth certificate with a Christian name and going to a school run by a priest. He says, "I was kind of a mix of trying to remember I was a Jew and at the same time trying to forget it. Otherwise, it meant my life." At some point while going to school, he acknowledged that he became quite Catholic. I was going to Mass daily. It was no longer something I was doing by design. I believed in it, and I believed in it very strongly. He underwent an emergency baptism during a bombing raid when he was sheltering with the son of the family who was hiding him. This son, who was otherwise a bully, had impressed upon Henri the necessity of baptism to go to heaven in case they were killed in the air raid. Henri struggled with all forms of religion in the aftermath of his experience. In his 1995 testimony, he articulated an incredulity that no doubt many child survivors, and probably also adult survivors, shared. "With having been torn from the little Jewishness that I had, thrust into Catholicism, being a devout Catholic for really almost 4 years, going to Mass daily and praying, I could never understand or accept why either God, if there were two or just one God, whether it was Catholic or Jewish or whatever, could let that happen to my family. So instead of either continuing to be a Catholic, because I was read on through liberation, or turning back to being Jewish, I became a devout atheist. And I could never understand again about religion. I rejected it totally and completely." Blanche Haber likewise spent much of the Holocaust hidden with different Catholic families, shepherded to and from hiding places by Abbé Joseph André. Her mother had steadfastly refused to allow her to be baptized, though must have perceived the influence that such a hiding experience would have had on a young girl who was only 8 in 1942. Even after liberation, surviving mother and daughter continued to depend on the Abbé for assistance. Blanche remembers living in terrible, humiliating poverty when they could not afford even a bicycle. The interminable wait for definitive news about her father and his brother, who, along with her older siblings, had responded to labor orders in 1942 and not heard from since. Ultimately, none of them came back. Her mother wanting to talk about what they had lived through, and Blanche being unable to. She knew her mother worried about her becoming Christian, despite resuming Jewish religious and cultural practices when they were reunited. It was confirmation of her father's murder that pushed Blanche to reject religious identity entirely. Her Judaism for the next several decades was entirely performative. She said simply, "I felt nothing for it." It was only having children of her own and watching them grow up that opened for Blanche the possibility of returning more genuinely to her Jewish identity. In this, I think she's similar to other survivors I have encountered who identified usually becoming parents, occasionally becoming grandparents, as a motivation to reconsider their religious identity. The historian working to credit children with agency in this period, both during the genocide as well as in the immediate aftermath, is presented with several challenges beyond the ones I've had time to discuss. One of the most significant is the activity of Jewish agencies on the ground in Europe in 1945, who worked assiduously to reunite surviving Jews with their families. In the 3 Western European countries under consideration, there were tens of thousands of Jewish children who survived in hiding, who are now mostly waiting to be picked up by family members who, more often than not, did not come. Sometimes those who had hidden them were gone as well. It's impossible to know how many children ceased to be hidden at this time and simply became the identity they'd been camouflaged with, a Christian child in a Christian family. Conscious of how decimated the European Jewish community was and desperate to salvage every last surviving Jewish child, Jewish rescue agencies in Belgium, the Netherlands, and France scoured their countries and took control of the children they found, particularly those who'd been orphaned. They did this regardless of the expressions of love and affection that came from some of the rescuers who wanted to keep their children, as they called them. And they did not treat the children they were rescuing from their rescuers as independent or capable of making their own decisions. Those whom they deemed children, typically under the age of 16, were not asked about their own desires for their future, much less about their religious or spiritual identities. They were to be returned to their Jewish roots, their Christian disguises stripped from them. There were no exceptions. And now I'll attempt to finish up. My research is still very much ongoing. My research assistant used some key terms for me to try and find the testimonies of child survivors in Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. And I stopped him when he found 1,700. So I've only introduced really about a half a dozen to you here today. My conclusions are very much preliminary and somewhat inchoate. I do not doubt that my familiarity with scholars who have already worked in this important subject will grow, and I'm looking forward to exploring them. It is clear there was no single monolithic one-size-fits-all experience of children in hiding during the Holocaust. For all of them, adopting a Christian identity was an essential strategy for survival. They were not given this choice. The parents who chose to place them in hiding felt they had no choice too. Theirs was the utterly heart-wrenching, choiceless choice, counting on the readiness of Christian rescuers and the malleability of their children to make that choice work. Beyond that, each child has her own story to tell. Some kept Christianity at arm's length, others embraced it with enthusiasm. Some went through the motions and mouthed the right prayers and supplications when required, but never felt it was their own. Others evidently found solace, a sense of security, a stability in the rituals of the new religion. And still others encountered muted anti-Semitism among their rescuers and pressure to convert. Others were confident that almost no one knew their true Jewish identity and were therefore left alone. To treat these children as active agents in their world, capable of feeling and articulation and a growing sense of self, leads me to reconceptualize the idea of the choiceless choice that shaped their young lives. That is to say, the choice of their parents to hide them. And one of the scholars whose work I do know, Suzanne Fromen, reminds us to recognize this choiceless choice for what it actually is: Jews saving Jews, as the parents became for their children their first rescuers. Returning to Antoine Burgard's world of possibilities idea, and considering the experiences of Trixie and Henri and Blanche and Mariette and the others, I'm increasingly convinced that there are other ways to try and understand what they went through, ways that embrace their vulnerabilities and their limitations, recognizing their specific experiences of displacement, dislocation, fractured family, and their own identities, while also recognizing their ability to be agents, however constrained, in their own right. Even within the choiceless choice, there was room for action-taking and independent decision-making, what we call as historians agency. The child survivors show clear evidence of forming opinions about religious identities that they navigated, both while in hiding as well as in the aftermath. They asked to convert. They clung to Judaism in secret. In their heads, they rejected Christianity or all religion entirely. They chose to trust their Christian rescuers and form bonds with them, or to keep them at arm's length, or to hate them, or to resist their parents' attempts in the aftermath to rebuild formal bonds, or re-immerse them in Jewish culture and Jewish rituals. They chose to learn Christian prayers, to remember them years later, or surreptitiously to remember and recite the Jewish prayers in their head from before. From what I've witnessed, Christianity for them was absolutely a necessary camouflage, an essential part of the disguise that facilitated their survival. But it wasn't just camouflage. It was more than that. It was an opportunity for them to begin to form their own identity. As such, it was a source sometimes of distress and resentment. It broke apart surviving families, for sure, after 1945, but it was also a security and a comfort. Some survivors clung to aspects of it for the rest of their lives, even if they returned to Judaism. In the video testimony of Trixie, she actually spends much of her time fingering a rosary that she had received as a child from the nuns that she loved so much. Others put aside the identity they adopted in hiding, much like one puts aside a winter coat after spring arrives. So it really was variegated across the group of child survivors, and maybe even within each survivor herself, whose identity, as is any child's, is in constant flux. And that too serves as an integral lesson imparted by these child survivors who decided to speak about their survival. They have asserted their voices, and in doing so reclaimed their individuality. And in this way, they remind us, the historians, the students, that surviving a genocide is a story about individuals living, thinking, deciding, and acting in extreme circumstances, regardless of their age. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Rossi. We have a few minutes for questions. If you all, anybody has a question? I see you in the first, and we'll probably do it.
Thank you. Did the Catholic Church keep records of all the children that they were doing this with? And did they share that information with the Jewish organizations that were trying to help these children? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. I usually wander around when I'm speaking directly with my audience, but I'm told that my Zoom audience won't hear me if I don't stay at the mic, so I have to not wander. This is one of the more frustrating discoveries that I've made as a historian of the Catholic Church in this period. One wants to think of it, and it certainly presents itself as a top-down institution with the men on top in total control. And the more I read about it, especially in the Belgian case, the more I see that resistance efforts were very much bottom up. They were not directed from on high. And so they were not organized. It was very decentralized, and it involved lay people as much as clergy. And because of that sort of decentralized nature, the records were also very incomplete, sometimes deliberately so, in order to protect the rescuers if they were caught from, not so much from the certain sort of fate that awaited the rescuer, but to protect the children, to keep them in hiding, even if the rescuer was discovered and caught. So I do know that some rescuers who survived into 1945 and 1946 did work with Jewish rescue agencies in rediscovering the children and reuniting them with families, but not all of the rescuers survived. And even then it's hard to speak of them as a monolith. Some were resistant. Some wanted to see the children continue in their Christian spaces. Sometimes the rescuers refused to cooperate with the aid agencies. There's a very famous French case from the early 50s in which a Catholic woman who was a rescuer essentially smuggled two Jewish boys in her care, who she baptized, to several different places in an attempt to keep them from being reunited with I think it was an uncle who desperately wanted them back. So there was no single response that one way or the other. Yes, they did turn over all the paperwork that helped reunite hidden children. No, they didn't. They refused. It was a very checkered experience. This is a very good question.
I apologize. This question doesn't have to do with the Holocaust, but it does have to do with the Jewish child indoctrinated in the Catholic Church. It's a movie that I saw 3 years ago. It's called Kidnapped, the Abduction of Edgardo Marcara. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie. It had a profound effect on me. And it was the story of a young Jewish boy in Bologna in the 1850s, raised in a very well-off Jewish family with brothers and sisters, and he got sick. He was sick, not terribly dying or anything, just a cold or something, but their servant thought that he was in worse condition and had him baptized, unbeknownst to the parents. And shortly thereafter, the papal guard came and took him and brought him to Rome. And under the auspices of the Pope, he was raised Catholic. And I don't want to say more about that in case anybody else wants to watch the movie, but it's very profound. And your talk about a Jewish child being raised or indoctrinated into Catholicism reminded me of that movie. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
Thank you. I've not seen the movie, but I read the book on which it's based by historian and anthropologist David Kurtzer, who won I think it's a Pulitzer for his last book, which is about Pope Pius XII, different pope, equally controversial behavior, shall we say. But yes, the case of Edgardo Marcara is, I know it very well, and it's certainly a hard one to try and wrap one's mind around as a Catholic.
The movie was wonderful.
I'll have to put it on my list. Steven Spielberg at one point was attached to make it. He was quite animated about it when he learned about it. So.
Not a question, but I had a big friend who's French, who was hidden in a village to the west of Paris during the war. His father survived because he had joined the French army, and he was taken as a prisoner of war. And one of the things Pétain insisted on was that prisoners of war had to be treated well. So he survived for that reason. His brother and he survived from this town, and part of the reason they survived was the Catholic priest in the town announced in church that anyone who informed on these children would be excommunicated. And as a result, this was 1940, and excommunication still meant something. They managed to survive. you also hope that the chief of police was the brother of the mayor, and every time the Nazis were going to make a sweep, he informed the mayor the night before they were coming.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing.
First of all, I must congratulate you. Many of the points you make are very close to what I find, what I think, what I feel, having been one of the children.
Yeah.
There were 4,000 Jewish orphans in 1945. There was a committee, I'll make 3 short notes. There was a committee, the Dutch committee, the governmental committee, that was responsible for all these children, what to do with them, etc. One of the things they had in their plans was to do what the Nazis did not succeed doing. The Nazis, Hitler, wanted to solve the Jewish question.
Yeah.
The Dutch committee, or the Dutch, the reformed Dutch mostly, were going to solve the question by taking those 4,000 Jewish orphans and putting them with reformed Dutch Christian families.
Yeah.
That's another way to solve it. And I was one of these who went after the 4 years I was with the Christian family, Catholic family. I was one of these who was sent every 2 weeks to another farmer's family, where I came from Friday till Monday or whatever, and was taken into the family because this was a family, time and again, who wanted to adopt a child.
Yeah.
And I was at this time, at this point, was 7, and I did not want to go to any of them. That's one point. Another point I'd like to make is I had one uncle who was left with their wife and 2 boys, where I spent 9 months after the war, and it didn't work because they were as traumatized as I was. But they had 2 boys, and the family had decided enough with this Judaism, they're going to be Christian. And indeed, during the time I was with them for about 9 months, they sent me to a very devout Christian school, which I exclusively hated. But anyway, the family had 2 boys, and they both turned out to be complete failures because they couldn't stand the psychological discussions or difficulties that came from them being changed by their own parents from Jewish boys into Christian boys. There are other points I could make, but I will make one more point. I had one sister left, and she was hidden in the same small town where I was hidden with a different family. I didn't know where she was or what. I didn't know it was in the same town, but I didn't know where she was, and I never saw her all through the war. She was with a family that baptized her, and she was completely absorbed in that family, and she was one of the family that were the other children. There were 7. I, on the other hand, and this is very significant, I think, the day or the evening that the families came to pick me up, the mothers of 2 families, my sister and I, were headed into the war. And my mother, I was 5 years old, put me on the dinner table, and she says, "Martin, you are a Jewish boy. Remember that? Let's forget about it for a while." And this stayed with me till today. And it was very important to guide me to do what I thought I should do when being Jewish. However, the family, like my sister was basically Catholic. My family said, "You belong to another genre, to another group." And at the end of the war, when they did not know, it was 4 years I was with them, they did not know what to do with me because nobody was left for the family. And then the other family told me, "Martin, you are a Jewish boy. And we're not going to keep you, we're going to find a way for you to go up. So there were many absolutely opposite directions and opposite ways of doing this, of solving this.
Yeah.
I may add that my sister, who had suffered very badly, just one minor point, she would sit in Catholic church, school, Catholic school, and the teacher, the nun, would talk to them and go through lessons, telling them how bad the Jews were. And she was sitting there, 20, 25 kids, and she heard that the Jews were so bad. Well, she was about this, you have to think to herself. I mean, this is torture.
Yeah.
And after the war, I of course met her. I met her time and again, and had long discussions with her. I had emigrated to Israel, which was my salvation. I went to the Netherlands every year, twice a year, and long talks with her. In the end, she came to Israel. She forgot the 12 years where she had been both Catholic and both.
Yeah.
She married, had 3 Jewish children, and forgot the whole thing.
Wow.
So there are many, many different variations of this.
Yeah.
And thank you for your talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We have time for one more question on the back. Again.
I just want to mention that the fear of being discovered as Jewish extended here to the United States, especially during the early days of World War II. My mother was Jewish, and she and her brother had made a decision with their mother, their widowed mother, that they, because my uncle was then entering the U.S. Army, and my mother graduated from Catholic St. John's University, was going to the University of Texas in Austin to get a master's degree in English education. So they were in a farm where they'd been brought up. So they apparently made the decision that they would not identify as Jewish from that point on, because they didn't know what was going to happen in the world. And so my uncle just identified as non-religious, but my mother identified as Protestant, and she had blonde hair and blue eyes, so she was able to pass as that. And I don't think that she could have dated or married my father, as she did in 1943, if she had identified as Jewish. My grandmother, my father's mother, in El Paso, Texas, was very Catholic, and I don't think they would have allowed him. And so we were brought up not knowing that our mother was Jewish, all through the 1950s, 1960s. And the 3 grandchildren of my Jewish grandmother we never met our grandmother, who lived in New York City and later in Connecticut, because the fear apparently was if we met her, we talked to her, it would come out that she was Jewish. So she died in 1965 without ever meeting any of her 3 grandchildren. And still, it wasn't until 1989 that I went to New York City and I did research in the library and archives there, that I found the burial place of my grandfather. And when I got to the cemetery, and I saw Star David going into the cemetery, that's the first time I realized that my mother was Jewish. So, and then I talked to her about it. She told me what had happened. So I just wanted to tell you that fear extended even into this country during World War II.
Thank you.
I think we're out of time for questions. Before we conclude tonight, I just want to extend a special thanks to my sponsor, Julie Galper. Your friendship and your commitment to this program has helped us sustain for many years, so thank you so much. You all hopefully know we're streaming tonight's event, and we record as many of these workshop programs as we can. You can see many of our past recordings on our website. You can find out more, and if you're not on our mailing list, please consider signing up. That's the best way to learn about the future events. And actually, before I conclude, I have on my other sheet of paper a note about our next few events. So our next workshop will be entirely virtual on March 5th, featuring, now I've gone off script, I have to find the name.
Ileana Adler.
Thank you, colleague Hertz. Ileana Adler who will be speaking with us. Their talk will focus on decades following the Second World War, when refugees and survivors residing around the world worked collectively to create commemorative volumes dedicated to their shared hometown communities. Our two final workshops of the year will be April 16th with Barry Trachtenberg and May 14th with Kitty Morris. And so please join us for all of those. And as we conclude, a final round of applause for Professor Rossi. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening tonight.